Imagine an outboard so tough it could take a wave to the face, stall out, and still fire up on the second pull. No digital screens, no fuel injectors, just raw, crackling two-stroke fury, and a reputation for outlasting the boats they were bolted to. From fishing lodges in Alaska to racing docks in Florida, these Mercury two-strokes were everywhere. Loud, light, fast, and nearly indestructible. But then in 2005, they were gone. No fanfare, no grand send-off, just quietly erased, like they were never meant to last as long as they did. But owners knew better. Mechanics still talk about them, and to this day, collectors pay top dollar to get one back. So what really happened? And why did Mercury kill off one of the greatest engine lines they ever built? Let's rewind. It started with a roar on a racetrack, not a lake. Mercury didn't build fishing motors, they built weapons for the water. Back in the 1940s, Mercury Marine wasn't interested in slow. They were founded on performance. Karl Kiekhaver, the company's founder, was obsessed with speed records. His motors weren't just for boating. They were designed to dominate. By the time Mercury unveiled its signature two-stroke line in the 1950s and 60s, the DNA was already there. Lightweight blocks, high RPM screamers, and a no-nonsense layout built for one thing: winning. That legacy bled directly into models like the Mercury 20, 25, and 50 horsepower two-strokes. They weren't luxurious. They didn't have EFI, but they could take a pounding, bounce back from saltwater abuse, and still pull a skier at dawn. Mechanics loved them because they were built to be fixed, not replaced. Let's talk numbers. The 1970s era Mercury 25 horsepower weighed around 87 pounds. Today's equivalent 25 horsepower four-stroke, over 150 pounds. That weight difference meant more planing speed, more fuel efficiency at throttle, and less stress on small aluminum boats. In simple terms, less engine, more fun. By the 1980s, Mercury had nailed its signature formula. Their two-strokes were in everything, from duck boats to river skiffs to backup engines on sailboats. Many were carbureted, rope-started, and air-cooled. The technology wasn't advanced, but it worked. And better yet, it was forgiving. Run bad gas? It'd complain, but it'd still run. Store it for a season without draining the bowl? A quick pull, and it was back. The Merc 9.9 horsepower became a fan favorite among weekend warriors. The 50 horsepower Classic 50 was praised for its mid-range torque and wide-open throttle punch. Mercury's 2.5 horsepower mini motors were reliable enough for Antarctic expeditions and light enough for teenage kids to haul down a dock. And through it all, Mercury's reputation grew. By 1990, they weren't just a performance brand, they were the American outboard. But there was one problem they couldn't outrace: the future. What happens when performance meets policy? We're about to hit the turning point, and it's one that changed the entire marine industry forever. Ask any old-school boater what engine they trust to get home in a storm, and they'll probably say a Mercury two-stroke. These engines weren't elegant. They weren't whisper quiet, but they were stubborn. The kind of motors that didn't care if you used old gas, skipped your oil change, or knocked them around on a rocky beach. They still ran. And when did they stall out? Most would fire back up after 2 or 3 pulls. No electronics, no sensors, just spark, fuel, and fury. What made them so loved? Let's start with the power-to-weight ratio. The Mercury 40 horsepower two-stroke weighed around 204 pounds, compared to modern four-stroke models pushing 240 to 260 pounds. That weight difference meant faster hull shots, easier transform mounting, and less drag on smaller hulls. You could get more speed and better fuel economy without upgrading your boat. Now, imagine a 25-foot bay boat loaded with gear, dogs, and people. The older Mercury 90 two-stroke could plane it in seconds. The same boat with a heavier four-stroke might take twice as long and burn more fuel doing it. Then there was the sound. That raspy two-stroke growl wasn't a flaw, it was music. You didn't just hear it, you felt it. Especially models like the Mercury 25 Lightning XR, which delivered sharp throttle response and a distinct low-end rumble. Maintenance? Simple. A screwdriver, a spark plug wrench, and a half-decent arm could fix nearly any issue on the water. Carburetors were accessible. Gear oil swaps took minutes. And if you snapped a shear pin, you could field replace it with a spare and be back cruising before your buddy even found his manual. Many models used loop-charged two-stroke architecture, a design that improved efficiency without complexity. They didn't need high-pressure fuel systems or electronic injection. Fewer parts meant fewer things to break, and that's exactly why remote fishing lodges and rescue teams kept them on standby for decades. These engines earned trust the old-fashioned way. They showed up, ran hard, and got people home. But under the surface, the world was changing. Regulations were tightening. Emissions mattered more than nostalgia, and Mercury had a choice to make. In Chapter 3, we find out why governments came for the two-stroke, and why Mercury had no way to fight back. It wasn't a mechanical failure that killed the Mercury two-stroke, it was paperwork, stamped in Washington and enforced by the EPA. By the early 2000s, small engine emissions were on the radar. The Environmental Protection Agency's Phase 1 regulations, which began rolling out in 1998, targeted marine outboards for their high hydrocarbon and nitrogen oxide output. Traditional two-strokes, by design, mixed oil with fuel and expelled part of it unburned through the exhaust. That unburned mix? It created a cloud of emissions up to 75% higher than a modern four-stroke. And regulators were done looking the other way. So, Mercury had a decision to make. Re-engineer their classic two-stroke line from the ground up, or move on. They tried both. First came the OptiMax, Mercury's attempt at a cleaner two-stroke using direct fuel injection, DFI. It was fast, powerful, and far more fuel efficient. But it was expensive to make, complex to maintain, and early on, known for reliability hiccups. That left traditional carbureted two-strokes exposed. They didn't meet the new standards, and retrofitting them would have cost more than just redesign. It would have required rewriting the business model. By 2004, Mercury announced it would no longer manufacture traditional two-stroke outboards for the U.S. market beyond 2005. No special editions, no commemorative farewell, just gone. Dealers were told to stop ordering carbureted two-strokes. Parts supply began to quietly shrink. Manuals disappeared from brochures. Mercury shifted its marketing machine fully behind four-strokes and OptiMax models. And just like that, the most powerful engine line they'd ever built was discontinued. Owners were stunned. Some didn't realize what had happened until years later, when they went to replace their trusty 25 horsepower and found nothing. No stock, no support, just online forums filled with mechanics swapping used power heads and scavenging for original cowls. One fisherman described it best. It was like your dog ran away, and you didn't even know until you opened the gate and found the chain was empty. Mercury didn't celebrate the end. They couldn't, because for decades these engines had been their soul. But what made them so legendary in the first place? In the next chapter, we'll unpack what made Mercury's two-strokes perfect, and why nothing has quite replaced them since. When Mercury killed off its iconic two-stroke engines, there was no retirement party, no glossy ads, no last edition commemorative model with a polished cowling. Instead, the exit was quiet, strategic, almost clinical. Around 2004, brochures quietly dropped listings for carbureted two-stroke models. Tech manuals started disappearing from dealer shelves. Replacement parts? Still available, but only in certain regions. And stock levels started dwindling fast. For most owners, there wasn't a memo or a press release. Just a trip to the dealer, followed by confusion when the response was, "They don't make that anymore." Mercury didn't announce a final run. They didn't honor the engine that powered fishing tournaments, hunting trips, and family vacations for generations. Instead, they shifted their full attention and marketing dollars to four-strokes and the newer OptiMax line. Sales teams were retrained, service centers were encouraged to push downgrades, owners were subtly nudged toward cleaner, quieter, and smarter engines. But many boaters weren't ready to switch, especially those in remote or rugged areas who trusted the simplicity of two-stroke design. Some continued using their Mercury engines until they literally seized from age, and even then, they rebuilt them instead of replacing them. In rural marinas, parts became bartering currency. Lower units were traded like baseball cards. Cowling decals were peeled off dead motors and reused on rebuilt ones. And somewhere in that process, a quiet cult following emerged. Interestingly, Mercury two-strokes remained available internationally for a few more years, especially in developing regions where emissions regulations were looser. Models like the 15 horsepower and 40 horsepower could still be found in Southeast Asia and South America well into the 2010s. In these areas, Mercury engines were prized for their reliability and brutal conditions, just as they had been decades earlier in the US. By the time most American boaters realized what was happening, it was already over. Their favorite engine wasn't discontinued last week or last month. It had been gone for years, and the factory never said goodbye. And maybe that's what stung the most. Not that Mercury moved on, but that they didn't look back. They were never meant to impress in a showroom. No chrome accents, no touchscreen displays, but on the water, Mercury two-strokes were everything a boater wanted, and nothing they didn't. What made them perfect? Start with weight. The legendary Mercury 25 two-stroke weighed in at around 114 pounds. Its modern four-stroke counterpart? Over 160 pounds. That 46-pound difference meant faster hull shots, easier mounting, and better fuel efficiency at speed, especially on lightweight hulls. Every ounce mattered when launching off-plane or trailering solo. But it wasn't just about speed, it was about trust. Fewer sensors meant fewer error codes. No computers meant no software glitches. These engines were mechanical honesty. Turn the key or pull the rope, and they ran. No questions asked. They also had heart. Two-strokes naturally delivered higher torque at lower RPM, making them ideal for everything from water skiing to hauling crab pots. The classic 50, a 44 cubic inch workhorse, was beloved by guides, fishers, and racers for exactly that reason. It didn't whine, it didn't hesitate, it pulled. And then there was the sound. Mercury two-strokes had a signature exhaust tone, a deep, throaty growl that echoed off dock pilings. You didn't need to see the engine, you heard it and knew exactly what was coming. Some owners even tuned their props or exhaust to make the growl sharper, more aggressive. Maintenance? Easier than fixing a lawnmower. Oil mix, spark plug, carb cleaning, that's it. There were stories of boats sinking, being salvaged, and the engine still firing up after a plug swap and a carb flush. As one marina mechanic once put it, if it had compression and gas, a Merc two-stroke would run even if you kicked it into gear with a cinder block. They were rugged, unapologetic, and built to be used, not pampered. Which is why, even today, used Mercury two-strokes have skyrocketed in value. A clean 25 horsepower or 40 horsepower model from the late 90s can fetch more than its original MSRP. That's not nostalgia, it's supply and demand. But if they were so good, could they ever come back? In the final chapter, we explore the future and why Mercury may never build anything like this again. Short answer, no. But the story doesn't quite end there. After Mercury pulled the plug on their classic two-strokes in 2005, other companies tried to rewrite the rulebook. Evinrude stepped up with the E-Tech line, a modern fuel-injected two-stroke that met EPA standards, sipped fuel, and still delivered the punch that old-school boaters loved. For a while, it looked like the two-stroke revolution might get a second chance. But in 2020, Bombardier shocked the marine world. They shut down Evinrude completely, ending nearly a century of outboard history. The E-Tech died with it. marking the official end of mainstream two-stroke production in North America. No other major manufacturer has picked up the torch since. Meanwhile, Mercury has gone full throttle on four-stroke and electric innovation. Their new V6 and V8 engines are clean, quiet, and packed with tech. And the Aviator series? All electric, zero emissions, and tailor-made for a future where regulations, not preference, decide what hangs off the back of your boat. But here's the twist. Mercury two-strokes are more popular than ever in the restoration and collector scene. Across forums, auction sites, and garage workshops, there's a booming market for vintage Mercury engines. Enthusiasts rebuild them, repaint them, even swap parts across decades to keep the legacy alive. One guy in Florida built a Franken Merc using a 1989 Powerhead, a 2003 lower unit, and a tiller handle from 1995. And it runs better than most brand new motors. And on the used market, prices have surged. A clean 2003 Mercury 25 horsepower two-stroke in running condition can go for upwards of $2,500. For comparison, it's sold new for around $1,600. There's a reason for that. These engines were simple, brutal, loyal. They didn't care about service intervals. They didn't need diagnostics. They did one thing: run. And they did it better than anything else. So no, we'll never see them come back in a factory crate. But they haven't disappeared. Not really. Because sometimes the perfect machine doesn't evolve. It survives. In the memories of boaters, the hands of mechanics, and the roar of a cold morning start. Maybe that's exactly why it had to go. They built it to last a decade. It's still outliving generations. If you ever owned a Mercury two-stroke or dreamed of one, you know the sound, the smell, the feeling. Like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments, because engines like this never really die. They just wait for someone to pull the cord.